Today on the program, the following three stories about the Israel-Hamas war. We look at the challenging conditions health and aid workers in Gaza are working in. How Germany could play a potential role as a negotiator in the current situation between Israel and Hamas. And a special focus on how the Holocaust shapes German policy towards Israel and the beliefs of many Germans. But first, Israel has categorically ruled out a ceasefire in its war against Hamas, which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says would represent a surrender. He again vowed to crush the terrorist group's ability to govern Gaza or threaten Israel following its deadly attacks on October the 7th.
Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
And earlier, we asked DW correspondent Tanya Kramer in Ashdod how Israelis were reacting to that statement.
Well, yeah, we just heard it there. He says it's not a time for a ceasefire, but it's time for war. And I think this is very concerning for many of the relatives and the families of the hostages because, you know, they are fearing that by going deeper inside Gaza, by widening this ground operation and incursion that we are seeing, they might harm the lives of their loved ones and their relatives. This is what military experts here are talking about. It will be very difficult on the one hand to have, you know, this widening of the ground operation. You're seeing that, you know, Israel is moving deeper inside Gaza. That's what the military is saying. There have been engagements there as well with Hamas. That's what the military is saying. At the same time, some of the hostages are believed to be possibly underneath Gaza in the tunnel systems. So it will be very difficult, a very difficult task to rescue those hostages. And that's why we're also seeing, you know, at the same time we understand and believe that negotiations are still going on, and we also need to see what are the interests of Hamas in all this. They have been releasing a video with the three hostages in it, you know, this is a life of proof as we have for the families, but at the same time it's also very hard for them to see it. So we will have just to wait and see, you know, if there's any development in this case in the coming days.
In Gaza, humanitarian and health workers are increasingly working with limited resources, and the constant threat of bombing is making an already difficult job a life-threatening one. The UN says never before have so many of its aid workers been killed in such a short time.
Rushing towards the site of an Israeli airstrike. For these health workers of the Hamas-controlled health ministry, every second counts. Maneuvering through narrow lanes to bring the injured back to the hospital. But they are short-staffed and working with meager resources.
We are still in need of volunteers because right now all of our ambulances are working around the clock. We work all day long at full capacity, so there's a lack of drivers and paramedics. We hope someone comes forward to help the volunteers because they're working all day, just like official employees.
And a growing number of these volunteers are being killed on duty.
I've had colleagues killed since the first day of the war. If this scared us, then we'd all would have stopped working. But we don't let it affect us. Our goal is clear, which is humanitarian service to save our people. That's the least we can offer.
The overwhelming workload has seen many health workers temporarily moved to the hospitals. Health officials say resources are at their limits across Gaza. The conflict is also taking a mental toll on doctors and paramedics who, like others in Gaza, live with a constant fear of airstrikes.
The biggest challenge is the bombing, which is indiscriminate. That means we have medical staff who work in hospitals during the day, and when they go home in the evening, they're terrified. They sleep in the same room with their children because they're afraid of being bombed. They tell us we prefer to sleep together in the same room so that we either die together or live together. So psychologically, the medical staff are completely exhausted.
The UN is warning that an immediate ceasefire has become a matter of life or death for millions of Gazans and for UN aid workers who are taking an unprecedented toll.
I lost 64 colleagues in just over 3 weeks. The last tragic passing confirmed was 2 hours ago. Samir, head of security and safety in the Middle region, was killed with his wife and 8 children. This is the highest number of UN aid workers killed in a conflict in such a short time.
With Israel's campaign expanding and Hamas militants deeply entrenched, for aid workers, there's no relief in sight.
No agreement in sight at the UN Security Council either, which met on Monday evening to discuss the war and casualties among civilians and UN staff.
The lives of UN personnel must be protected. The lives of humanitarian workers must be protected. The lives of journalists must be protected. The lives of all civilians, innocent civilians, Israeli and Palestinians, men and women, children and elderly, must be protected. There's no hierarchy when it comes to protecting civilian lives. A civilian is a civilian is a civilian.
We have said time and time again, I repeat, there is no military solution to this conflict. We are yet to demonstrate there is a peaceful one. Prove us wrong.
Just like my grandparents and the grandparents of millions of Jews, from now on, my team and I will wear yellow stars. We will wear this star until you condemn the atrocities of Hamas and demand the immediate release of our hostages.
The yellow star, of course, a symbol of Jewish persecution in Nazi Germany. Today, Germany has been one of Israel's staunchest supporters, due in part to its historical responsibility after the Holocaust. But the German government has also stressed the need to keep the conflict from spreading and to help civilians caught in the middle.
Germany's response following the slaughter by Hamas in Israel was to launch a diplomatic push. Just days after the attacks, Chancellor Scholz told the German parliament he was working hard for peace. I'm in close contact with the Egyptian President al-Sisi, who has communication channels to Gaza. Later today, I will speak to Turkish President Erdogan. In addition, I will receive the Emir of Qatar, whose country has an important mediation role, which it plays in these days. Soon after, Scholz himself went to Israel. Germany shared Israel's grief, he told Benjamin Netanyahu, but did not want the conflict to spread. Mr. Prime Minister, my government is doing everything for this conflict not to escalate. It's important to prevent a fire spreading in the region. Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock also embarked on an intensive round of crisis diplomacy, taking in Jordan, Israel, Lebanon and Egypt. She even spoke at the United Nations in New York. All the talking shows Germany believes it has an important voice, especially when it speaks in concert with Washington.
We play a certain role, of course, probably more important than all other European leaders, but we have to see it in this context. I mean, the first player, to my view, will remain the United States.
When it comes to the Middle East, Germany is not a neutral country. The Nazi Holocaust of the Jews means that Germans bear a unique responsibility to stand with Israel, especially when it's threatened. This was set out by Angela Merkel in a speech to the Israeli Knesset in 2008. She said protecting Israel is part of Germany's national interest, its Staatsräson, a view which still guides policy today.
I think in this situation, because we have this commitment of the Staatsräson, yes, this special commitment for Israel's security, probably problematic to become a mediator. We are kind of on Israel's side. Of course, Germany was among the countries who said, no, we are not. There's no way that we're going to criticize in this crucial moment Israel.
At the same time, German leaders have long maintained active relations with the Palestinians under President Mahmoud Abbas. Germany is valued as a donor and an influential European power, but also precisely because of its connection to the leadership in Jerusalem. Berlin also has good links with other Arab and Muslim nations. Could that be useful in the search for peace?
We have good relations to the Sunnite states, to the Sunnite Arab states like Egypt, Jordan. We're talking to Qatar, we're talking to Turkey, and they're talking also to Iran. So there are some connections.
The German government's most direct priority in the current conflict is the fate of German citizens taken hostage by Hamas. It is also working to protect the more than 100 Germans registered as living in Gaza. As it tries to bring those people out of danger, Germany is using all lines of communication to bring an end to bloodshed.
And joining me now for more is DW political correspondent Julia Saudelli. Julia, how can Germany be a neutral negotiator when it is very publicly on the side of Israel?
Well, we definitely have a clear position from Germany, and this is summarized in this one term that is being used a lot by a lot of German government representatives at the moment, and that is the word Staatsräson, and that means that the right to exist of the state of Israel, but also the security of Israel as a country, are fundamental principles for the government of Germany, for the state of Germany, and these are all principles that are informing Germany's policy when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the current conflict, and that's why Germany is standing strongly by the side of Israel, and that clearly points to the fact that Germany is on one side and has taken a side, but on the other hand, we know that Germany is also one of the biggest aid donors to Palestinian civilians, and that it also has pretty friendly relations with a lot of Arab countries in the region, so that wouldn't necessarily exclude it from being a negotiator. What we know is that Germany actually really lacks the clout to really be a strong negotiator in this conflict. And, you know, all clues point to the fact that actually the U.S. is the country that has the most potential here.
But even when we do look at Germany's role as a negotiator, we see something happening at the UN General Assembly, for example, a few days back, where Germany abstained from a resolution calling for a humanitarian truce. Why?
Well, Germany is walking a fine line here. On the one hand, given the special relationship it has with Israel and the special responsibility it has towards Israel, it doesn't want to be seen critically from Israel, for example, in terms of votes within the UN. On the other hand, it also does see that there are humanitarian issues at hand when it comes to this question, and it also doesn't want to completely ostracize the Arab states that brought forward this resolution. That's why it likely went ahead with an abstention, and German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock explained why Germany didn't vote in favor of this resolution. This is something that many outside of Germany questioned a lot. Why didn't Germany vote in favor of a humanitarian truce? And she said that is because the resolution doesn't clearly state that Hamas's actions are terrorist actions, because the resolution doesn't clearly call for the release of all hostages, and because it doesn't clearly state that Israel has the right to defend itself.
Back to a point that you mentioned in your first answer, you were talking about aid, and I'm wondering how Germany balances its support for Israel with humanitarian aid for Palestinians.
Well, Germany is one of the biggest aid donors to Palestinian civilians, and in general, it is actually the second biggest donor in terms of aid in the world. And we've seen now, since Hamas's attack against Israel and the bombings happening in Gaza, it has announced that it will increase its humanitarian aid towards Palestinian civilians by 50 million euros. And, you know, we've also seen, on the other hand, again, Germany is walking a fine line. It also doesn't want this aid to in any way end up in the wrong hands. That's why it has started a review of all its aid contributions to the Palestinian civilians to make sure that this aid is ending up in the hands of the civilians and not, for example, aiding Hamas in any way, because it would be really bad for Germany to see that happen.
Stay with us on the line, Julia, because I'd like to transition from the political mood in the country to the societal mood, because Israel's war with Hamas has set off deep divisions amongst people. One sees this in the many kinds of demonstrations that are held routinely across the country. Here's more on what those look like and, above all, what people participating in them feel.
They want to hear the calmer voices, protest against violence, want to appeal to the German government to work to stop the bombing of Gaza. The organizers of this demonstration distance themselves from the Hamas attack. It's very bad what happened there, and it's a terrorist attack that can't be excused. At the same time, revenge does not bring anything. We want to stand up for this message of peace. She calls it revenge, but international law allows Israel to defend itself as long as it doesn't deliberately kill civilians. Many demonstrations in Germany have been banned by police in recent days because of repeated anti-Semitic statements or criminal acts. This demonstration is only allowed under certain conditions. They include, in this case, no Palestinian scarves.
Okay, he was really good. Yeah, really? But again, he wasn't escalating anything. He was actually fine. But I just wanted to do it for the safety of everyone.
This is a piece of.
Yes, but my dear, but it is a symbol. But we know what it's.
At this demo, symbols, flags, and slogans are banned. But some people chant controversial slogans anyway. Forbidden here because often it doesn't just mean freedom from occupation, but some use it to deny Israel's right to exist. Joanna Hassoun understands the people's anger. The German Palestinian works on integration projects, goes into schools, and offers talks with students who, in her view, are often taught a one-sided anti-Israeli view at home. They get that, in quotes, their Palestinian brothers and sisters are permanently oppressed, have been oppressed for 75 years. For example, they mostly don't see that there are also other initiatives, that there are also Israeli peace dialogues, that there are Israeli people who are also working for peace and for a state that is for an equal state. That's not communicated to them so clearly. The only thing they see is the Israeli military, which in part kills innocent civilians. The anger is not only felt among Palestinians. Other Arabs, other Muslims see themselves as also being affected, and many see Israel responsible for the violence, not Hamas, with its terrorist attack in early October. What is happening in Gaza has nothing to do with Hamas, but with Israeli attacks under a far-right government. In recent years, there have been many provocations at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, many arrests, the killings of Palestinians, so the reaction could be considered normal. I am here because my heart is breaking. I am very angry and very sad and very disappointed by people all over the world, all the politicians, organizations, humanitarian organizations. I am here so that I can protest against Israel. There are internationally recognized protected areas for Palestinians who flee. Outside of them, their status is unclear, even in Germany. Many suffer as a result, says Joanna Hassoun. They couldn't really build their identity here at all. and basically their thoughts, their identity, got stuck in Lebanon, maybe some even in Palestine, even though they have never even been to Palestine. Even the parents haven't been to Palestine. And that was also a phenomenon of the politics, which just didn't see that you have to give people who have lived here for 13, 14, 15, 20 years, that you have to give them a perspective. They feel unseen, unheard, frustrated that their flags and symbols have been banned at some demonstrations. I think many, maybe you don't quite see it here now, want peace, and also see both sides. There are also enough examples of the peaceful coexistence between Jews, Palestinians, peace activists on the ground in Israel and Palestine. With the war reverberating around the world, the angriest voices in Berlin seem the loudest. The calmer voices calling for peace are hoping they will be heard soon.
Julia Saudelia, political correspondent, is standing by. Julia, these protests we are seeing are happening in a country which acknowledges its historical responsibility for the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime in World War II. How has that shaped Germany over the decades?
Well, this is something that has really impacted the collective conscience of Germany and Germans. It is something that has influenced not only politics, as we've seen looking at how Germany positions itself today, but also German society, debates about how Germany should deal with its responsibility after the atrocities committed by Nazi Germany against the Jews is something that is debated in schools, in families, and other parts of civil society. And as we've seen, it has brought to Israel's security being considered reason of state, a fundamental principle, but it also has brought to a lot of support for Israel within German society. A recent poll that we've seen carried out after the October 7 attacks shows that 70% of Germans believe Israel does have a right to militarily defend itself against Hamas after those attacks.
So does all of that, Julia, also shape Germany's understanding of what counts as anti-Semitism?
Well, I would say that Germans and German institutions are keenly aware of what counts as anti-Semitic. The German government, the German state, has implemented a clear definition of what it considers anti-Semitic, and this states that anti-Semitism is any hatred directed towards Jewish individuals, their property, but also Jewish communities and institutions, and that the state of Israel as a Jewish collective also can be the target of this hatred and anti-Semitism. That would mean that, for example, any behavior or statement that denies the right to exist of the state of Israel would count as anti-Semitic. And this is something that is not necessarily seen this way in many countries around the world where the perception is different. But something like this would clearly count as anti-Semitic in Germany.
Can you give us some concrete examples, Julia? What would rate as anti-Semitism in Germany?
Well, clearly any direct insults or attacks that go against the Jewish person because of their religion and also Jewish communities. But also, if you look at for example, insults or hatred leveled towards the state of Israel, there are slogans that are heard across the world, often at pro-Palestinian demonstrations. We've heard that also in the report, chants of Free Palestine, but also a well-known chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. These can, in Germany, be considered anti-Semitic, and I'll explain why. This is because from the river to the sea means the idea that there should be a Palestinian state that goes from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, which is where Israel also is. And this implies that for a Palestinian state to exist, it would mean getting rid of the state of Israel and removing Jews from there. And that is considered anti-Semitic in Germany because, again, it denies Israel right to exist.
Does that explain why Berlin, for example, has placed restrictions on pro-Palestinian protests, but none on pro-Israeli demonstrations?
Well, this does in part explain that. We know that generally Germany is considered pretty liberal when it comes to granting the right to protest. But in this case, we've seen the police, especially in Berlin, acting in quite a strict way, in a strict interpretation of the law, because they say there have been indications at previous pro-Palestinian protests, but also at some of the ones that occurred in the early days of the current conflict, where there have been statements or behaviors that have been considered anti-Semitic. And the police says they cannot guarantee that these episodes will not take place again at protests that will take place now. And since they can't prevent this, they say we're going to stop the protests from happening at all. Now, this obviously causes some concern and some frustration for people who just want to go out and show, for example, solidarity with the civilians in Gaza or protest some of the policies of the Israeli government, but they are basically not allowed to take part in these protests because of all that is happening and all the decisions taken by the German police to stop these protests.
So does all of this that we have discussed, all this essentially translate to unconditional support for Israel from Germany?
Well, I would say Germany is clearly strongly positioned at the side of Israel. It is a state that Germany will support, and it is something that they really stand by, the German government and the German people. But we should also keep in mind that the German government stands by the need for a two-state solution, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, following the borders decided by the UN resolution in 1967. And we should also say that the German government has often been critical of policies by Netanyahu's government in Israel. For example, the promotion of settlements in the West Bank. It has criticized this openly and strongly. But certainly we can say that Israel and Germany are strong partners, and that Israel can count on Germany being one of its strongest partners in the world.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much for bringing us all that context. DW political correspondent Julia Sardelli in Berlin. Thank you. And that's it for now. There's continuing updates on the Israel-Hamas war on our website, dw.com, and on our Facebook and X pages. I'm Biresh Banerjee in Berlin. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.